I still remember the first time I saw Brandon Ellis. He walked into the main office as if the entire world had just been handed to him on a silver platter. A tailored black suit, a gleaming Rolex confidence radiating from every towering step, and absolutely no understanding of the actual work we did. "Just call me Brandon," he said with a smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient. We're going to make big things happen, starting today." A heavy silence spread, followed by some awkward clapping, the kind you hear at all company meetings or kindergarten graduations. I sat still, arms crossed. I had been at Vantara Technologies for nearly 9 years. I had survived 2 CEOs, 4 restructurings, and one near-fatal acquisition. I knew the game. But Brandon, he had no idea the first week was pure chaos. Brandon canceled all regular project review meetings, replacing them with strategic vision syncs. He fired 3 mid-level managers within a week, 2 of them by email. Then he started meddling with our flagship software product without understanding a thing about the system's architecture. That product, by the way, was something I had built 6 years ago after a failed acquisition, almost tanked the company. I had redesigned the entire back-end infrastructure, leaner, more secure and scalable. And I didn't just design it. I had patented it under my own name, a defensive move suggested by the previous CEO. He had said, "If you ever leave, they'll have to beg you to come back." It was spelled out in my employment contract, quietly tucked away among clauses most executives never bothered to read, and Brandon. He hadn't read a single line by week 2. He started referring to me as the lead engineer instead of my actual title, Director of Systems Architecture. A small but meaningful demotion. He avoided my eyes in meetings, interrupted me when I spoke, and praised junior staffers for ideas I had just outlined moments before. Classic tactics: diminish, undermine, erase. I stayed calm, I always did. But this time I started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning. Brandon strolled into my office, leaning casually against the doorframe, like he was starring in a bad workplace drama, and said, "Eva, can we have a quick chat?" I gestured toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. "I'll be blunt," he said, using the tone many men mistake for sincerity. "You've been here too long. We need people with a different pace." I raised an eyebrow, already understanding translation. "We're firing you effective immediately. The severance paperwork has already been prepared by HR. It was all too smooth, too confident." I almost laughed. I leaned back in my chair, looked straight at him. Really looked. He had no idea. No idea what I owned. No grasp of the hidden clause in my contract. No understanding that without my written consent, the company had no legal right to use the system that powered 82% of their operations. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled, a polite, calm, deliberate smile. "Got it," I said, standing and extending my hand. He didn't shake it, just nodded and turned away as if it was all over. At the door, he tossed back one last comment. "I'm not wasting another dime on a washed-up employee who peaked 5 years ago." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Brandon," I said. He hesitated for a split second at the threshold, maybe confused by my composure. Then he walked away. I packed slowly, meticulously. A few personal items, a plan I'd nurtured for 5 years, a USB drive, holding nothing but some team-building photos from last year. As I walked through the open office, a few eyes flicked toward me. Some people quickly looked away, uncomfortable. Others gave small, sympathetic nods. No one spoke because in places like this, fear spreads in silence. At my car, my hand started trembling slightly, not from sadness, but adrenaline. I wasn't angry. Not yet, I was just curious. How long would it take for them to realize what they'd done? I knew the answer. Monday, the weekend passed like a silent storm, heavy, suffocating, and crackling with static. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my sister, who always said I worked too hard. Not my best friend, who if she found out would show up with red wine and a 5-step revenge plan. And certainly not my ex-husband, the one who had once called me too. Career-obsessed, I needed silent space perspective. On Friday night, I wandered through the city past shuttered bookstores and quiet cafes, letting the cold night air numb the bruised parts inside me. I didn't mourn the job. I mourned the insult, the ignorance, the idea that someone who had never written a single line of code could so easily dismiss all my sweat and blood and call it excess. By Saturday morning, I was ready. I dug out my employment contract from my personal files. Everything was clear in black and white. The patent was in my name. The clause had been vetted and notarized, a small section granting me full control over the architecture I had built. Vantara was only allowed to use the system through a licensing agreement, and any renewal updates or expansions required my written approval, and that license, it would expire on Monday. I laughed quietly, not from amusement, but from the irony. By 3 p.m. I had sent an email from my personal account since my company one had already been deactivated to the company's legal department. Subject notice of expiration of intellectual property license. Immediate action required. The body was entirely factual, no drama, a simple reminder that the right to use the system would expire at midnight Sunday, unless renegotiated directly with me, the patent holder. Continued use beyond that point would constitute intellectual property infringement with legal consequences. I signed off formally, Eva Whitmore, inventor backend infrastructure architect of Vantara, version 2.3 U.S. Patent No. US 9347901B. I CC'd the legal team, the former CTO, and of course Brandon. Then I closed my laptop and went for a run. 4 miles through misty streets, weaving past tourists and street vendors, letting the tension bleed out of my body. By Sunday evening, my phone started lighting up 2 missed calls from unknown numbers. A voicemail from HR saying they wanted to clarify some points about my severance agreement. Another email from legal, requesting immediate contact to discuss intellectual property terms. And finally, late at night, an email from Brandon subject serious misunderstanding regarding contract. Urgent resolution needed. The message, Eva. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to speak with you directly to clarify and resolve before work resumes on Monday. Please call me as soon as possible. Brandon. There it was, the panic. I didn't respond. Let them scramble, let them discover on Monday morning that the entire company's systems, from scheduling, CRM, API integrations, auto-reporting to the customer portal, were built on a license they had just lost. I wasn't seeking revenge, I wanted respect. And if it came in the form of urgent emails and legal meltdowns, I was happy to accept. Clients couldn't access the dashboard. A message from Brandon popped up on my phone. Eva, call me back immediately. Right after that, another message appeared from Sophie, an old friend from the product department. Eva was. It you, please tell me it was you. Brandon is losing his mind. The system's completely down, meetings are canceled, clients are calling nonstop. The board has been notified. I smiled, not out of spite, but out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage, this was the inevitable consequence when those in power believed they were brilliant without evidence and hastily dismissed the value they couldn't comprehend. At 8:31 a.m., my phone rang. This time I answered. Eva. Brandon's voice came through, trying to sound calm but tinged with clear panic. We need to talk. I had no idea about the patent situation, he said quickly. We want to bring you back into the company, and I cut him off gently but firmly. I'm open to discussion, Brandon, but not about the old job. We're talking about a licensing agreement as an external partner. Silence, Eva. He lowered his voice, almost pleading. Don't make this personal. I smirked. Oh, it's not personal, it's strictly contractual. Then I decisively hung up, and at that very moment the real negotiation began. On Monday morning at exactly 9:12 a.m., I walked into Vantara's building. Not through the employee entrance like before, but straight through the main lobby. The sound of my heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. Crisp, firm, the kind of sound I hadn't made in years. After all those mornings quietly slipping in with a coffee cup and a laptop bag, this wasn't a return, this was a re-entry. The receptionist looked up, eyes wide. Miss Whitmore, I gave her a polite smile. I have an appointment with the legal department. She nodded quickly, her hand slightly trembling as she picked up the phone. I could feel the shift in the air, the halted conversations, the side glances from employees pretending to focus on their screens. Take the elevator to the 7th floor. The receptionist said, They're expecting you. I stepped into the elevator and the doors slid closed. In the mirrored reflection, I saw a version of myself, confident, unshaken. But inside, my heart was pounding, not from fear, but from focus. I had prepared for this moment all weekend, not just to defend my work, but to assert my worth. When I entered the legal meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with caution. The company's chief counsel stood to greet me, accompanied by two in-house legal team members and a senior advisor I recognized from an old merger case. Brandon wasn't present. I sat at the head of the table patiently waiting. They would have to come to me. Eva, the chief counsel, began, voice low and firm. "Thank you for coming. We'd like to resolve this amicably." "Of course," I replied calmly. "I always prefer clean solutions. I assume you've reviewed the licensing agreement." He nodded. "We have. Your claims are valid. The patent is registered under your name and under the agreement. Continued use without your consent constitutes a violation. The expiration date is clear midnight last Sunday." He paused, then leaned forward. "We'd like to propose renewing the licensing agreement for another year under the same terms." I smiled. "That's not possible." A slight murmur rippled through the room. The senior advisor scribbled quickly into a notepad. "I'm not here to re-sign the old terms." I continued calmly. "I'm here to negotiate a fair deal. Currently, the company's systems are disrupted, correct?" They hesitated. Then the chief counsel finally admitted. "Correct? Then let's talk numbers." I straightened up, no beating around the bush. "I want $2 million for the next 12 months. Non-exclusive license reviewed quarterly. Technical support provided by me or a team I designate, and specifically patent acknowledgement must be included in internal documentation." It wasn't an outrageous demand, it was a fair valuation for the system's impact. Silence fell over the room. A cautious in-house lawyer spoke up. "This is a significant increase. Proportionate to the value," I responded immediately. "Something this company has forgotten how to measure." The chief counsel leaned back. "We'll need to present this to the board. I can wait," I shrugged. "But keep in mind, with every passing hour, your client trust, corporate reputation, and stock price are eroding." They didn't argue at 10:03 a.m. While I was sitting in the hallway with a bottle of mineral water and my phone on silent mode, I spotted Brandon pacing behind a glass partition. He hadn't seen me yet. When he finally did, Brandon froze. His first expression was confusion, then disbelief, and finally realization. He slowed down, trying to appear composed. "Eva," he started awkwardly, "I didn't expect you to come in person." "No, Brandon," I replied coolly. "There's a lot you didn't expect. This has gone too far." He shoved his hands into his pockets, attempting a friendly tone. "We should have talked before legal got involved." "You mean before you fired me?" I raised an eyebrow. "That was a decision based on incomplete information." "No," I said, standing up, eyes locked on him. "That was a decision based on ego, and now he was paying the price." He opened his mouth to explain, but I didn't give him the chance. "I'm not angry, Brandon. I just no longer have patience for people who underestimate me. I documented everything. The patent, the licensing clause, the unjustified termination email. I didn't come here to argue. I came here to negotiate. If you still want to salvage this situation, and maybe your own career, you'd best let the legal team handle it." His jaw tightened. I turned back toward the meeting room. "Oh, and Brandon," I said over my shoulder, "good luck," that word luck, something I never needed. This time I saw Sophie standing near the elevator at the end of the hallway. She looked at me, her expression a mix of amazement and admiration. "They're calling you the firewall upstairs," Sophie said with a laugh. I chuckled softly. "Better than being called redundant personnel." She giggled, then lowered her voice. "People are talking," Eva, Brandon scrambling, telling the board. "It was all a misunderstanding, claiming you never notified anyone about the license expiration." "All lies," I replied calmly. "But let him talk. The truth doesn't need to shout." Sophie leaned in closer, whispering, "We all saw the memo you sent. You CC'd legal ahead of time. Everything's documented. The interns are whispering like it's the Watergate scandal." I didn't respond right away. In my mind, the plan for the second wave was already taking shape. Because regaining control wasn't enough, I wanted accountability. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email, not to legal, not to Brandon. I sent it directly to the chairman of the board, whose personal address I still had from an old collaboration project. The subject line was brief, regarding system licensing, public statement, and leadership conduct. I wrote respectfully, concisely, focusing only on facts. I outlined the scope of the patent, its operational significance, the timeline of the license expiration, and conflict. Brandon's reckless decision to terminate a critical system architect without reviewing legal dependencies, and the false narrative he was now spinning. I ended the letter with a question. If this is how he manages internal assets, how can the board trust him to handle external partners, vendors, or regulatory bodies? That afternoon, a reply came not from the chairman himself, but from the board's senior liaison. The email read, Eva, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. We appreciate the information you provided and will conduct an internal review with full documentation. In the meantime, we support the licensing agreement and look forward to finalizing it within the next 48 hours under the terms you proposed. We regret that the company's leadership failed to recognize your value sooner. I sat still for a few seconds, then leaned back in my chair. It wasn't a public apology, but it was a shift not just in the story, but in the balance of power. That night, Sophie messaged me again, Brandon's losing it. The board's meeting first thing tomorrow morning. He's calling everyone, trying to control the narrative. I typed back, let him try. I have the truth, and a mountain of evidence longer than his resume. The next day wouldn't just be about the licensing deal, it would be a reckoning. Wednesday morning at exactly 9:00 a.m., the board convened. At 9:23 a.m., I received an email not from Brandon, not from legal, but directly from the chairman of the board. The content was short but clear. Please join the closed executive session at 11:00 a.m. Your perspective will be invaluable to the discussion. That word, valuable, echoed again. Just 2 weeks ago, I was deemed worthless. Now I was pivotal. At 10:55 a.m., I walked into the executive boardroom on the top floor of Vantara's headquarters, a place I had only entered once before years ago during a system upgrade presentation for the former CEO. Back then, I stood off to the side unnoticed. Today, I walked straight to the seat reserved for me. Without hesitation, Brandon was already there, seated across the table, arms crossed, phone face down on the table like some pathetic prop. Ty perfectly nodded a forced smile, but his anxious eyes gave him away. The chairman opened the meeting with brief formalities, then turned to me. Eva, thank you for being here. We've reviewed the licensing documents and your materials carefully. We'd like to hear your perspective before we deliberate. I nodded, I stood up, I opened my notebook, but didn't read from it. I met each board member's gaze and spoke. Leadership isn't about control. Leadership is about clarity. It's about understanding the systems, both technical and human, that keep a company running. When a new leader steps into a system they don't understand, they have two choices. Listen or destroy. Brandon chose destruction. He shifted in his seat but didn't dare interrupt. I continued. He called me incompetent, terminated me without evaluation, and ignored the legal ramifications of the system this company depends on. Worse, he only started listening after the failure. After the servers crashed, after the clients flooded the phones, I let the silence stretch. Everything I built was designed to protect this company, but no system can protect you from arrogance. And if the CEO doesn't understand the value of the infrastructure they operate, nor the people who built it, then you're not just risking legal exposure, you're risking collapse from within silence. A board member asked, if you were in his position, what would you have done? I smiled softly. I wouldn't have taken that position. I would have worked alongside those who understand the product, the culture, and the law. I would have built leadership on collaboration, not control, and I wouldn't have waited for a lawsuit to start respecting my team. Pens scratched across notepads. The chairman nodded slightly. Thank you, Eva. Please wait outside while we deliberate. I left the room composed. 10 minutes later, I heard shouting from inside. Not my voice, Brandon's yelling, blaming, trying to shift fault onto legal, the CTO, even HR, but this time the old tactics were useless. At 11:47 a.m., the chairman opened the door and called me back in. We've made a decision. I re-entered the room. Brandon was gone. The chairman sat down, hands folded, effective immediately. Brandon Ellis is suspended pending formal investigation. We will issue an internal statement clarifying the situation and publicly acknowledging your contribution to Vantara's core infrastructure. He handed me a draft of the official statement. I read aloud the first line. We recognize Eva Whitmore as a key leader, innovator, and intellectual property owner behind the success of Vantara Technologies. I didn't expect the wave of emotion that rose inside me. Not because I needed fame, but because I knew how many women in this industry never got this. What would you like to do next? The chairman asked. I agree to license the system. I said, but only as a short-term consultant. I want autonomy. And I want to help establish safeguards so this never happens again. Agreed, he said, nodding firmly. As I left the room, he called after me. Eva, you didn't just save the system, you saved the company. I nodded slightly. I know I didn't just want to leave with a victory. I wanted to leave something lasting behind. Within a week, the consulting agreement was signed. I would stay for 90 days helping to stabilize the system after the crisis and training my successor for the role of chief architect. On my terms at my own pace, people kept asking if I would come back full-time. The answer was always no, because even though I still loved the work, Vantara was no longer the place I had once known, and I was no longer the same person. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my new role, I stood outside the building after a long meeting watching a group of interns pass by. A young woman wearing thick glasses and an awkward smile paused when she saw me. Are you Eva Whitmore? She asked, her eyes lighting up. I nodded, and her face brightened instantly. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, we talk about it all the time in the internal Slack channels. You made us feel like speaking up is possible. I smiled genuinely. Then keep speaking up, I encouraged her. Never wait for permission. She nodded eagerly and ran to catch up with her group, leaving me standing there with a strange feeling. Not exactly pride. Something deeper, legacy. That weekend, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to truly breathe. I boarded a train out of the city, turned off my phone, and let the blurry scenery drift past the window. No more endless strategy loops, no more backup plans spinning in my head. Just stillness on free. Peace. That night, I journaled for the first time since it all began. A line stood out boldly. I never demanded power, I only asked for recognition. And when they couldn't give it to me, I built my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. In the weeks that followed, word began to leak out. Brandon was officially terminated. The internal memo cited irreconcilable differences in leadership style. I heard whispers of other lawsuits, of other hush-hush firings that had happened. Even before I left, the culture at Vantara Technologies began to shift slowly but undeniably. Exit interviews were redesigned. Internal training now included intellectual property awareness. For the first time, individual contributions were acknowledged at every technical milestone. Of course, some of the senior executives tried to rewrite the story. One director even said at a conference, Eva has always been an important part of our team. We've always appreciated her talents. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the truth and the system. The architecture I had built stood firm just as it had on day one. My name now sat exactly where it belonged. On the system, in the documentation, in the story. A few months later, I received a handwritten letter from David, the chairman of the board. It read, Eva, you changed how we think about leadership, not through noise, but through steadfastness. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. I tucked the letter into the same drawer where I had once kept my severance papers as a reminder of where I started and where I refused to end. Today, I run my own consulting firm. I only partner with organizations that truly want to build sustainable systems and nurture their talent. Not with hollow, flashy leadership. I choose my clients carefully. I set clear boundaries, and I never sign a contract without reading every single line, because in the end, this story was never about revenge. It was about value presence and the quiet power of someone who refused to let the system erase them. And if you, someone out there, have ever been underestimated, sidelined, or labeled difficult, simply because you knew your own worth, remember this: you don't have to shout to make an impact. You just have to know exactly who you are and never ever hand your power over to those who don't deserve it. Because when they thought they had fired you to silence your voice, they didn't realize they had just lit the fire. Eva Whitmore's story isn't just about a woman standing firm amid the undercurrents of the corporate world. It is the journey of someone who dared to believe in her own worth, even when the world around her chose to ignore it. A journey that proves you don't have to demand power when you possess knowledge and unwavering determination. Power will inevitably find you. If this story resonates with you, if somewhere along the way, you too have felt underestimated or had to fight to be heard, remember this: your true value does not depend on anyone's recognition. It lies within the steadfastness and self respect you carry with you every single day.